Imagine being asked to surrender the very thing you prayed for, the promise, the blessing, the answer to years of waiting. What happens when God asks for the thing you love most? Would you still trust him if obedience hurt? This is where we find Abraham in Genesis 22, a man who had already walked with God, already seen miracles, already heard promises. Yet his greatest test was still ahead. Because faith is easy when God is giving, faith becomes real when God is asking. For years, God had promised Abraham a son. A nation would come through him. His descendants would be as numerous as the stars. But there was one problem. Abraham and Sarah were old. The promise looked impossible. Yet, after decades of waiting, God fulfilled his word through Isaac, the miracle child, the promised son. Then comes the moment no one expected. God tells Abraham to take Isaac to a mountain and offer him as a sacrifice. Not a stranger, not an animal, his son, the promise itself. Imagine the silence of that journey. 3 days walking, 3 days wandering, 3 days carrying heartbreak while still choosing obedience. Abraham didn't fully understand, but he obeyed. Because mature faith does not require complete understanding before taking action. Faith says, God, I don't understand you right now, but I trust your character. The moment of obedience. As Abraham prepares the altar, Isaac asks a haunting question. Father, where is the lamb? And Abraham answers with faith before he ever sees provision. God himself will provide. That statement wasn't just optimism. It was prophetic trust. Abraham places Isaac on the altar, raises the knife, and at the last second, God speaks. Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. The test was never about destruction. It was about devotion. God wasn't trying to take Isaac. God was revealing Abraham's heart. Would Abraham trust the giver more than the gift? And Abraham passed the test. A ram appeared in the thicket. Provision came after obedience, not before. Sometimes we want God to show us the ram before we climb the mountain. But often, provision waits on the other side of surrender. After Abraham obeys, God speaks again. Not correction, not rebuke, a reaffirmation of promise. God says, "Because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you." God repeats the promise, but now with emphasis. Blessing, multiplication, victory, legacy. God promises Abraham descendants like the stars in the sky and sand on the shore. He says nations will be blessed through Abraham's offspring. This moment matters because the promise existed before the test, but obedience activated a deeper level of it. The mountain wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Abraham didn't get the whole plan. God didn't explain every detail. There was no roadmap, no detailed reasoning, just instruction. And Abraham moved. Sometimes God asks us to obey in ways that feel uncomfortable, to let go, to forgive, to trust, to move, to wait. And we hesitate because we want clarity. But faith often walks before it sees. Obedience says, I trust what God said more than what I currently feel. Isaac wasn't just Abraham's son. He was deeply loved. He represented dreams fulfilled, identity, future, security. And sometimes blessings can quietly become idols. not because they are bad, but because they become ultimate. God wanted Abraham to know the promise should never replace the promiser. The question becomes, what would be hardest for us to surrender? Success, relationships, comfort, control, dreams. God is not trying to destroy us in surrender. He is teaching us dependence. Abraham named that place, "The Lord will provide." Not in the valley, not before the climb, on the mountain. How many breakthroughs are waiting on obedience? How many answered prayers sit behind delayed trust? Sometimes we pray for provision while resisting the very step God told us to take. Abraham discovered something powerful. When God leads, He also provides. Maybe you feel like Abraham right now. Maybe God is asking you to trust Him in uncertainty, to keep believing despite delay, to surrender something precious, to obey without knowing the full picture. Here's the encouragement. God sees your obedience, even when nobody else understands it, even when it feels costly, even when the outcome feels unclear. The mountain is not the end of your story. Sometimes the hardest act of obedience becomes the birthplace of your greatest promise. Abraham walked up the mountain with a question. He walked down with deeper faith. What he thought he might lose, God multiplied. And perhaps the greatest truth from Genesis 22 is this: God never forgot His promise. The test didn't cancel the blessing. The test revealed the depth of Abraham's trust, because obedience to God is never wasted. Sometimes the very thing that feels like surrender becomes the doorway to greater purpose. What is God asking you to trust Him with?